violence and the issues of, division and drawing lines on the earth and fractionating communities, fractionating the earth itself. That whole concept is one that is very much associated with, from our perspective in the Texas-Mexico border, indigenous peoples, that's a worldview that came hand in glove with colonization. And mineral extraction for Native peoples is a very violent set of processes because it involves slavery, enforced labor, coerced labor, and in that way, women's experiences are something that I'm very interested in looking at. One thing that I've learned since I've been doing a lot of work among Indigenous women in particular is that the border, on the one hand, in the U.S.-Mexico region, is quite militarized. It's very heavy, infrastructure. All kinds of technology is used to enforce that space, and at the same time, it's not a system that is easily managed by states or nations because it's a place of life and it's a place of history. It's a place of stories. Indigenous people's social movements over time and place, I think, are another very erased and very oftentimes marginalized in normative ways of telling and writing and discussing history of the nation, history of the settler state or the settler nation. And on the one hand, Indigenous peoples in the U.S.-Mexico border region today, we see an incredible amount of suffering and struggle, extreme poverty, and really, this whole area geographically has been extensively structured as a marginal place in North America. Indigenous peoples have a continuing story of a struggle for rights within the colonization projects of Spain, of Mexico, of Texas, the United States, etc. So what's important to think about today is to rupture this concept that Indigenous peoples are in the past, that their histories before 1848 or after 1848 are somehow these frozen little artifacts. And when we sort of flip things over and start looking and listening closely to Indigenous people's oral histories and their traditions of keeping stories alive through many different forms, whether that be songs or dances or traditions of rumors and gossip, whatever it is, there's many different ways in which Native peoples maintain place by maintaining stories and keeping stories alive through generations. And this is not something to sort of keep within this little structure called folk tales or myth. This is something really complex and dynamic. And so that's something I think that we need to pay more attention to. Because oftentimes in Native communities in the Texas-Mexico border region, it is women who are the caregivers and the caretakers of family stories. They are the ones who gather people together for feasts, or they get people together for reunions. They also keep boxes of photographs that are meaningful to families. They keep records of birth dates, death dates. And they take care of the graveyards, where history is literally embedded in the land. Well, I am an Ende person, she Ende. She konitai kokia, she kwakenende, she konishkoshish Ende. So I've just said who I am. I'm of clans, traditional clans, of very, very old peoples who have been in these lands for many, many, many millennia, and all of our stories come from this earth, all in our communities. Really forced me to confront Indigenous people in pain in a way I never had been forced to examine that from a very close perspective. Seeing my own mother, my elderly uncles, seeing the community members go into various different forms of internalizing the hatred that they were subjected to in the years during which the wall was being constructed. I came to see myself how I had been trained growing up my whole life in Texas, in South Texas, what's often referred to as Deep South Texas, a very segregated place during my lifetime. I grew up to see many similarities between Indigenous women's analysis of their lives in a bordered region, and I saw some important differences. I went through many checkpoints and it was made normal. I did see and hear in my whole life a lot of women resisting the checkpoints, resisting the forms of containment and militarization that the border was back in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't until I was doing that work in Arizona that I started to see the ongoing effects of bordering and borders within borders and checkpoints and other kinds of militarized areas within the United States, as well as on the Mexico side and between the Vietnam border. And so I was making connections to the technologies of borders between Okinawa, for example, and the U.S.-Mexico border. Back in 2009 and 10 is when I really started making a much more important connection to Indigenous women's analysis of borders and militarized spaces in local places, and how Indigenous women were reaching out beyond the local, beyond the so-called constitutional structure of their nations, which really, very negligibly offer Indigenous peoples the same sort of citizenship. I started making connections between Indigenous women's multiple forms of creating spaces to protect community, as well as to critique multiple levels of power structures. And then how Indigenous women were getting and gaining capacity to create an analysis beyond borders, transnationally, hemispherically, transhemispherically, to other Indigenous organizations and groups. Ultimately, came to really ground my research in a place that by the time the border wall was being constructed, I think I was very much, very prepared in new ways to understand Indigenous women's needs to engage the international arena of law, human rights, as well as Indigenous rights at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and the Inter-American Commission, and many, many other places. Where my research is located is, within spaces of Indigenous women's rights work, mostly. And today, especially, I will be going on some new research activities and gatherings and learning opportunities, working alongside more Native women in Mexico and back to the U.S. and Mexico and Texas borderlands.